There is a sound that hasn't existed yet, and in a few minutes, you're going to feel like you already know it by heart. Ford has spent decades either chasing the GT350 name or running from it. And what sits in front of me right now suggests they've finally decided which one they mean to do. I'm with Automotive Pulse, and if you've been here before, you know this isn't the channel that reads you a spec sheet and calls it a review. We go looking for the decision nobody announced in a press release, the compromise nobody wanted to admit to, the reason a car ended up feeling the way it feels instead of just looking the way it looks. And this next-generation Mustang GT350, presented here as a realistic future production interpretation of where Ford's performance division is heading, has one of those decisions buried in its drivetrain that most enthusiasts are going to argue about the moment they hear it. Before we get to that, look at what's standing in front of you, because the proportions are telling a story before a single word gets spoken. The hood is longer than you expect, not for drama, but because there's a genuine belief that a flat-plane or cross-plane V8 needs room to breathe, room to be serviced, room to matter. The greenhouse is pulled low and back, a fastback silhouette that reads less like a pony car and more like something that studied grand touring proportions and decided to keep the muscle car's temperament anyway. The front fascia carries a projected new lighting signature, a tri-bar daytime running light that nods backward at Mustangs long since retired while doing something no factory Mustang has done at this resolution before. The wheel arches are wider, flared with real intent rather than cosmetic add-on, hinting at a chassis engineered to actually use that width rather than just look aggressive standing still. Every line down the flank is doing double duty. The character line running from the front fender toward the rear haunch isn't decoration. It's projected to be functional, channeling air toward brake ducting, and a rear diffuser that Ford's aerodynamicists are believed to have fought hard to keep visually restrained. That restraint matters because it tells you this isn't a car desperate to prove itself with wings and vents. It's a car that already knows what it is. And here's the part I promised you. Internal reports and industry chatter around Ford's performance roadmap suggest the next GT350 may abandon the naturally aspirated flat-plane crank philosophy that made the outgoing Shelby cars legendary among purists in favor of a supercharged architecture borrowed and evolved from Ford's own Predator lineage. For a nameplate built on the mythology of high revving, screaming naturally aspirated fury, that is not a small decision. It is, depending on who you ask, either a betrayal of what GT350 means or the only mechanically honest way to hit the power figures modern enthusiasts now expect. We'll get back to why that argument has real merit on both sides. Walk up to the door and pull the handle, and there's a mechanical certainty to it, a weight that tells you this isn't a car built down to a price. Settle into the seat, and your body drops slightly lower than a standard Mustang. Hip point adjusted for a more serious driving position, bolstering pulled in tighter around your ribs like the car already assumes you're going to need it. The steering wheel is smaller in diameter than you'd guess, flat-bottomed, wrapped in a suede-like material that's been chosen specifically because sweat and grip matter more here than showroom polish. There's a scent of fresh leather mixed faintly with something warmer, an interior material chosen to feel lived in from day one rather than sterile. The materials throughout communicate craftsmanship without shouting about it. Carbon fiber trim on the dash isn't glossy for the sake of looking expensive. It's left with a slight texture that catches ambient light differently depending on where you're sitting. Analog-style gauges sit ahead of you, backed by a configurable digital cluster that Ford's engineers are said to have designed around minimizing distraction rather than maximizing screen real estate. Close the door and the outside world doesn't vanish completely, and that's intentional too. This is a car that wants you to hear the road, just quieter, more curated, so that when the engine does speak, it has something honest to speak over. Now bring it to life. The starter engages with a mechanical clunk before the supercharged V8 catches, and there is nothing electronic sounding about it. It settles into an idle that's lumpy in the way old-school American V8s are lumpy, a slightly uneven cadence that tells you there are 8 cylinders in there with real personal opinions about firing order. Blip the throttle and the exhaust note doesn't scream. It barks, A deep-chested crack that rattles low in your chest before the supercharger whine layers in underneath it, mechanical and slightly menacing. Roll into acceleration, and that whine builds into a rising howl that sits directly over the exhaust's baritone. Two distinct voices harmonizing rather than fighting each other. Shift the manual gearbox, and estimates suggest Ford has preserved a proper manual option here, and you get a short mechanical clack through the shift knob. No rubbery vagueness, just steel finding steel. At high RPM, the supercharger's whine becomes almost violent, urgent in a way that a naturally aspirated engine never quite manages. Less operatic than the old flat-plane crank cars, but arguably more physically intimidating. Pull away from a standstill, and the throttle response is immediate. No dead zone near tip-in. No hesitation waiting for boost to build, because the supercharger is engineered to deliver its character from idle rather than making you wait for it. The steering is heavier than a base Mustang, weighted deliberately so you always know exactly how much grip the front tires have left in reserve. Brake pedal feel is firm and progressive, the kind of pedal that rewards a driver who's learned to trail brake, rather than one who stabs and hopes. Through a corner, the chassis balance leans toward neutral, projected to be the result of a wider front track and a suspension geometry tuned to resist the nose-heavy tendencies that have haunted Mustangs of the past. Road texture comes through the seat and the wheel in equal measure, small enough that you never feel punished on a real street, present enough that you never forget you're driving something serious. Estimated output sits somewhere in the 850 to 950 horsepower range, depending on final tuning. A number Ford is expected to target rather than confirm outright, and every one of those horses feels accounted for the moment you ask for them. None of this comes without a real compromise, and it's worth naming honestly. That supercharger, whatever it gains in low-end urgency and forced induction drama, sacrifices some of the high RPM theatrical scream that made the outgoing flat-plane GT350 feel almost like a race car wearing a license plate. Purists will notice, and purists will be right to notice. This is a different kind of intensity, not a lesser one, but different enough that longtime Shelby loyalists deserve to walk in with their expectations recalibrated. Ford is believed to be targeting a price point somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 to $90,000 for a well-equipped example, positioning it just below the exotic segment while sitting well above where American muscle traditionally lived. Is that worth it? Emotionally, you're not just buying horsepower at that number, you're buying a nameplate with real racing lineage, a chassis engineered with genuine intent rather than badge engineering, and a driving experience that very few cars at any price manage to replicate honestly. You're paying for the fact that somebody at Ford still cared enough to argue about crank architecture instead of just chasing a number on a spec sheet. Where does this car sit in the landscape? It isn't chasing European supercars, and it isn't trying to be a luxury flagship. It reads as a modern muscle icon reborn, a legacy revival that refuses to simply nod backward, positioned to challenge the idea that American performance has to choose between raw power and genuine engineering sophistication. This is a car built for the driver who still shifts their own gears because they want to, not because they have to. The kind of person who understands that a slightly imperfect, occasionally lumpy idle is more honest than a perfectly smoothed over one, who values feel over convenience, who wants their car to argue back a little. Not a collector chasing appreciation, a driver chasing Tuesday night on an empty back road. Speaking of which, this is a car that feels spiritually correct on a long American highway at dusk, the kind of open desert two-lane where the horizon doesn't ask you to slow down for a while. It's also quietly a car you could drive every day. The ride, while firm, doesn't punish you on rough pavement. The trunk holds a genuine set of luggage. And Ford's adaptive driver assistance suite, including intelligent adaptive cruise and an over-the-air update system that keeps the car's software current without a dealer visit, means daily practicality was never sacrificed to build this thing. Safety systems work quietly in the background, present when needed and invisible when not, exactly the way they should be. Before we close this out, here's a genuinely debatable question for the comments. And I mean genuinely, because I don't think there's an obviously correct answer. Should a nameplate like GT350 evolve its engine architecture to meet modern power expectations? even if it means trading away the naturally aspirated character that built its legend? Or should some names be protected from that kind of change, no matter what it costs in horsepower? I'd argue both sides have a real point, so tell me where you land. And if you want more honest breakdowns like this one, instead of recycled spec sheets, stick around and subscribe to Automotive Pulse. This is a car that doesn't ask to be remembered. It simply makes sure you never forget it. This video is a realistic future production concept based on current automotive industry insights, publicly available information, market trends, design analysis, and reliable reports available at the time of writing. Specifications, features, pricing, performance figures, production plans, and launch timelines discussed here are estimates and projections only, subject to change, and should not be considered officially confirmed unless and until announced directly by Ford Motor Company.